a comment made by somebody to say that in God we trust and everybody else must bring the data.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's see the data. Let's see, and I think that's. Sorry, Duncan.
Yeah, I was saying I attended a data conference last week, and one of the quotes that I picked there, somebody was talking about this digital era that we're walking into, and they were saying, the quote was saying, the illiterate of the 21st century won't be someone who cannot read and write, but somebody who cannot read and understand data and argue with data. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and it's fantastic that, because we actually did a data literacy discussion yesterday. I know Jess was on and Zane, and we spoke of all the different challenges of making that data available. So it's one thing to comment about data literacy. It's the next thing, as from a data management professional, is how do we make sure that people can work and access the data and argue with the data. So the other thing, we missed 2 sections out last week, and so I'm going to come back on them, and that was almost the data visibility and the data protection. So this today is going to be talking about how do we get the visibility and how do we protect the data at the same time. But thanks for the engagement, guys. If you want to chat and ask a question, please, happy to have that discussion. So yes, this track is about the data professional. So we are going to be talking a little bit more technical than the execs and certainly the data citizens. So these were the pain points: vision, politics, skills, control, behavior, definitions, and accessibility. And this is what we, as Paul rightly said, we spoke about last week. But I did notice when I went through it, I didn't really get to the visibility and the avoidance of risk. And we were having a discussion today with Caroline Mouton, who's going to be talking at the data privacy meeting next month on October the 14th. And we were just talking about, and I'm quite interested to know from you guys in terms of who's aware of that. Data privacy is probably the first regulation, be it GDPR, be it Papaya, where the violation of that regulation is now a criminal offense. How many people realize that? So, and the consequence of that is that your chief information officer, and in some cases your data management professional, will be asked to testify the extent of the damage that was caused. Okay, so let's role play this. You have a data breach or you have a data leakage, and the court calls you up to say how many and how extensive was the leak in terms of how many people were affected by it. Because remember, the penalties in Papaya are proportional to the damage. Okay, so if you go up there as a data governance person, Duncan, let's talk about you. If we have a breach of Stanbic data, and they say, well, how big was the exposure and what data was exposed, would you be able to answer it? So as data governance people, would we be able to answer this question? And well, this is the thing. Yeah, and it can't be tough. That you got to give an answer, otherwise you look bad, right? So you lose trust, and the people are going to say, so you're telling me that you don't actually know how many people were affected and what the level of impact was. And so someone's going to, and the point I'm trying to bring out is, it means that we are going up in the criminal court we can be held liable ourselves personally, not Stanbic. So there's not going to be Stanbic that pays the fine. It's going to be Howard Diesel, head of data governance for a certain company that's lost its data. It's going to be Duncan for the Stanbic data. And so, guys, we are now personally responsible for this, and we've got to start doing things about it. No, it's not all doom and gloom. It's not the fact that we can't do things about it. We can put certain risks and we can take certain measures, and we can do something about it. But we've got to start doing something about it. I think that's the important thing. If we don't, we're going to hold ourselves liable for this. Any comments from you guys there? Any questions? Any comments? I did raise that point to shock you a little bit, to make sure that you were listening and asking questions. Did it work?
Yes, it worked for me.
Okay.
Absolutely, Howard.
It made me rethink if I want to be a CIO one day.
Yeah. The number of people that have turned that position down when they fully understand the implications are big.
Howard, why are you killing our goals of becoming chief data officers?
What I'm trying to do is make sure you're the chief data officer, not the information officer that has to answer these questions. But you may they may call on you.
So in Botswana, specifically because I'm sitting in Botswana at the moment, the parliament has just enacted, we saw a few months ago, what we call it's more like a papaya, it's called the Data Protection Act.
Right.
And what they put there in one of the clauses in that regulation, it's not only an offense liable to a fine, but they've also put imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 years. So I think that's quite scary.
Okay. So you say not exceeding 3 years, so you limit it to 3 years of jail time, irrespective of the damage.
Yeah. Depending on the magnitude of the breach.
Okay. All right. So, and then the other story that I was sharing with Caroline, from an ethics point of view, how many of you people have read about the Audi emissions challenge that they faced in the US? Anyone? So what happened was they were caught. Someone noticed that they were caught for recognizing that the car was under testing for emissions. So the engineer was pretty clever. He could adjust the level that the car operated at depending on whether it was being tested for emissions or whether it wasn't. And when they were being tested for emissions, he managed to reduce the emissions of the car dramatically to pass the emissions test. And then when it got out on the road, then it was quite different. So it was deemed to be an ethical issue, and now the data engineer, the guy that wrote the software and the data, is having to respond in court for his involvement in the situation. So we as IT can no longer say, we were just given the requirements, we were just told what to do, the project manager told us this and we did it. That was a requirement that we got. We are going to be having to answer for our actions. But at the same time, if we raise the issue, and that was with Cambridge Analytics, there was somebody involved within Facebook that reported it to his manager and could produce evidence that they recognized the misuse. He was no longer in line for that, no longer held liable. So you can do something about it. You've just got to know and be aware of the fact that you are involved, be it an ethical issue, be it a privacy issue, whatever it is. You guys, we are all involved, and we got to take care of it, and we got to make sure that we're doing the appropriate reporting. All right. So not to panic, but if you're aware, then you can certainly manage the situation. All right. So these were the two areas. Sorry, that was visibility, lineage, and data catalog and protection. So I wanted to just and we had a thing yesterday on data literacy. In one of the first action items that we had to do was understand our data ecosystem. So one of the things that I wanted to just ask you guys in terms of how are you currently doing that? How are you managing your visibility of data assets within your organization?
Everyone's scared you're gonna ask them to do a test.
Yeah. I'm just trying to work out why the screen is blank.
Howard, is this visibility internally within the organization?
Yes, correct. You don't, I mean, it's actually fascinating the visibility in some of the areas that I'm looking at is for open data as well, in terms of countries sharing their data. But we referring to how would we do it internally?
Yeah, internally, from experience, we one way is to actually conduct road shows. We call them road shows, where you can go department by department or business unit by business unit, and you conduct meetings and you educate people on data, the importance of data, and all of that, and with the goal of creating data citizens, or people who will actually be data aware and data literate. So that's
Right.
one, road shows. The second
Would you
one
mind,
is
Duncan, would you mind just typing that in so that I can record the actual approaches that you've taken?
Oh yeah, sure.
And what you certainly said is correct, in terms of making data stewards aware, bringing the awareness to each department as to the data that you have. Are there any other approaches? If you wouldn't mind just adding it to the chat box, not the Teams, the Menti.
At the Menti, right?
Yes, in Menti, if you could answer on Menti.
Sure.
Yes. Okay, so data catalog is certainly one way. Okay. Okay, so you guys can keep on typing if you want. I like that taxonomy. I get the feeling that may have been Jess. Catalog. So could I ask, on a cataloging point of view, is that something that like a library system that people can log on, and it's got all the data assets in the organization? So I was quite keen to understand someone who's got some experience in building a data catalog. How are you structuring your data catalog? Is it something that you use a data governance tool to measure or to add your data assets in there, and that's how you're presenting it?
Hi, Howard. Dino here. I'm
Hi,
the
Dino.
one who created data catalog, and at this stage, from an MTN perspective, it's still at its infancy, but we have sort of a glossary of all the stuff that's on the intranet, where all the
Right.
terms and we maintain it, and it's version controlled and all of that. So IT in the background maintains that for us, but we update it on a regular basis with all the new terms that and KPIs that must be achieved by the business, so that the reports are actually connected to are aligned to all the terms that are there. So it's still
Okay,
its infant. We don't have a tool here.
Right. So if I can just ask a question, so that's almost your glossary that you're developing. Are you relating data assets to that glossary? So is it a way of saying, I have a term called financial indicators, and I can find the financial indicators in this data asset with that department within that area, and this is the information, almost a dictionary of what's in there. Is that the level that you're operating at?
Yes, true. That's where we because there were spreadsheets all over the place, so we've consolidated all of that in one place.
Okay, fantastic. All right, great, thanks. So we're seeing a whole lot of stuff that's important for us to get this visibility. And we can see that I think a lot of it, our visibility is almost, if I could say this correctly, if it's somewhat manual, that we are ourselves as governance people, and that we're having these road shows, awareness campaigns, teaching and stuff like that. And we're probably not doing a very good job, for example, of creating something like a Google that people can just type in to say, show me all the data that relates to financial indicators, or retail customers, or show me anything related to Howard Diesel, as an example. We seem to be doing a lot of manual and training and stuff like that. Is that a correct assumption? So, Duncan, is that sort of where you guys are getting in?
Yeah, definitely, Howard.
Okay. All right. So we know we've got to change this, right? We've got to get to a way where we've got the ability to search. We have a data catalog as a platform, right? We need a data catalog as a search engine, almost like a library where people can look things up. We need to build a way of classifying every single asset that's in our organization. And we talk about the ability to tag and metadata to add metadata freshness. We need automated population of the catalog, crowdsourced curation tags, right? So this is where we've got to get to. Now, I think the idea of a data lake and that quickly progressed to a data swamp, if we didn't catalog and classify the data properly, this is what we're getting into. So our data, I mean, I'm sure we've all been through a shared folder environment. I'm sure we're still in shared folders where we got stuff on Teams, stuff on SharePoint, stuff on folders or shared folders on our drives that are just, we just battle to find this stuff again. I know my own personal machine, the amount of time I need to search for presentations and things like that, because I don't have the proper tagging and the proper catalog. So getting the visibility right for me is there three aspects to it. Get your classification right, all right? Get your catalog right in terms of open APIs and this ability to have data catalog as a platform, and get your data protection right. Okay. All right. So this was almost a position paper that I put forward to with one of the customers, and the basic data strategy was in terms of the data strategy was about reducing the amount of collection of how many data points we're collecting and increasing the data points shared. All right, so as simple as that, guys. How much data are we collecting as an organization compared to how much data are we sharing as an organization? Now, the opening position that I put forward was that we need to have these data assets fully classified, and the asset classification would give us transparency, accessibility, and sufficiency. And once we've got the data classified, we can now put them into a catalog, which will give us the discoverability, the reuse, and the understandability. All right. So we've got to progress further than just thinking of data classification as that of security or the NIST type of scenario or privacy type of things. We have to get a way of classifying our assets, a way of, and SharePoint did a great job of this, if you guys remember those tags. Unfortunately, what happened to us is that we just allowed anybody to add any tag. And then it gets a little bit like Twitter, it gets a little bit like Instagram and LinkedIn, where we have these hashtags. And yes, some of the hashtags can trend and you'll be able to find everything you need on a hashtag, but there's thousands and thousands of different hashtags that are out there that are meaningless. And they're not really going to help us find the data. So if we don't have a taxonomy that shows the people what and gives them the context to help us set the context, we're not going to get this classification right. Okay? So I think we spoke about it here with ensuring tagging, metadata freshness, and if we just leave the tagging to the individuals, it's going to be interesting as to what they. I mean, we know just with what Danae was talking about in terms of a business glossary, if we don't have a structured set of tags that people can add, and those tags are the accepted business terms, we're going to get some really interesting tagging that's going on, and then we're going to battle to find stuff again. So what is critical for us to do in terms of data classification and visibility is starting off with this taxonomy and then building a catalog that will support that. Any comments, questions, arguments?
Maybe just a general comment. I mean, I'm relatively new to the data field, actually very new, and to my organization. But I think it's just shifted my thinking just to think about more about like what are we, instead of collecting so much data, how are we working to make it more shareable and accessible. So, I mean, just that point alone, and I know that's like the main kind of high level point, has been, has made quite a shift in how I've thought about things.
Right.
So thanks.
I like the point you bring up there, because this is something that I'd love to ask anybody around here that can help me define what sufficiency is. And Paul, you're not allowed to answer because I'm sure it was somewhere else. But who can help me define when I say asset classification facilitates sufficiency, what do we mean by sufficiency? Anybody?
That it's enough?
Yes. So we have enough data. So then the question and the important thing is that we don't have too much. So sufficiency is more about having too much data that causes confusion, because the more data I have, the more confused I get in terms of which one I must use. So then we're saying, okay, we don't want enough, and Papaya is coming along here in terms of protecting. Now we've got our customer data all over. if we then start having data quality issues, we now have a challenge that the data subject can challenge us on. So we've got to get to the enough. And by reducing the collection and increasing the sharing, we start to get to enough. And we have to have techniques of saying what is enough data. Now, enough data, the formal mathematical definition of that is it can answer the question. So if I have a question and that question, the answer to that question is dependent on 2 or 3 data points, then I shouldn't have 10 data points and I shouldn't have 1 data point. I've got to have the 3 data points that help me answer the question. So it does take a lot of analysis of the questions that you're trying to answer, but I probably know, and I can say for most of us, that we don't understand the questions that we need to be answering. So we can never get to this point of sufficiency. So we're always going to try to go for, let's collect more, let's get more, rather than do we understand what enough data is.
Howard?
Yes, Pumia.
A question from my side. How do we then bring in the whole data life cycle, like the whole document life cycle management? If we have to think about, is it enough? But at the same time, we have to think of ways maybe to discard it,
Right. I think you're bringing about an important point that I am going to address the data lifecycle down the road, but let's try to just answer the question that you have. When we design or model, or in the other way is when we look for a data request that somebody needs data. I think we have 2 options. One is we can create a system that populates that data for us, or we can go and buy it, or we can look on the internet to see if we've got any data around and we can download the data. Now, those 3 points or 2 points that we have, we're talking about acquiring the data or collecting the data. And I'm assuming that's what you're meaning by the data lifecycle is how do we plan for the data? How do we acquire the data? How do we collect the data? And then how do we reuse the data or use it and enhance the data? And then how do we destroy the data? Is that the sort of data lifecycle that you're referring to?
100%, yes.
Okay, so when we talk about planning the data, we always, and this is where sufficiency comes in, when we talk about a planning, and that's typically done by your business requirement, we need this data to make this decision. But a lot of the times we miss the second part of the sentence. We need the data. And we'd never ask to make what decision. So we just keep on getting told we need the data, we need the data, we need the data, and we just go crazy trying to find the data, giving them data wherever we can. Hopefully we can share it rather than create it, but a lot of the times we find ourselves creating the data. And we don't have enough checks in place from a governance point of view to say, why do we need this data? What is the purpose of the data? And POPI is probably one of the first regulations that are coming in now to say, why? What is the purpose for collecting? And what are we collecting only what we need? So remember, we refer to as minimization of data collection. Don't collect more than you need from the customer, otherwise you're overstepping the mark. And how do we define that? Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So I think the bottom line is we're missing the planning, and that's where we should be asked to prove that the data is sufficient. The benefit we get now is that we can now go back on all our data assets and say, is this data asset more than enough? Is it part of the enough, or is it too little? And then we can do a good job about collecting the right amount of data and sharing the right amount of data. Paul, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just helping Dennis I think part of his question is being answered, but he's looking for the
who.
which person, which role is probably the right person to identify these things.
The right role is the data architect. And of course, in support of data governance. But so the data estate is actually the responsibility of the data architect. And they should be managing the data that comes in to the organization according to the business requirements. So governance would be there about making sure we're getting the right requirements for the data. And of course, governance has to ensure the compliance and the regulatory stuff and put the controls in place. But the architect tends to be the person that is the doing person of this job.
Great, thank you.
Dennis,
is it helpful?
Yes. Sorry, I have to type the driving. Yeah, no, thanks.
No.
It helps.
Okay. I think any comments on that? I know Danae has played the role of an architect. Is that your understanding?
Howard, yes, it is, but I'm saying this with a pinch of salt because there's too many clashes with the data governance team. Because sometimes you find people.
You're right.
Really,
So politics aside, without any politics, the typical role for the planning of data in the data lifecycle goes to data architecture. That's the typical role.
Yeah.
And that's the person that can ask the questions, the difficult questions of, what decisions are you going to make? Are we going to get the right data? Is this the context of this data? Does it map to the enterprise data warehouse? Are we going to bring it into the warehouse in terms of that? And they have the data model for all the data that we have. They would be the best people to have the argument with data to say, you have enough, you don't need any more. And if you need more, please tell me why.
Yes, but that business also have to come in there. Also.
Yes, yes. You're 100% correct. Now we with Papaya we starting to introduce this, and I'm going to show you a slide a little bit later on in terms of how we can do it. But this is a very core discussion that we need to have, and who's responsible? Do we need to pay attention to it and to get this thing right? It's not just about security. Security's after the fact, right? Data's landed. Now we've got to protect the hell out of the data. We don't want anyone to get hold of the data, and we don't want it to leak. But why did we have the data in the first place? I love that one with, it was that estate agent, wasn't it, in South Africa? How long ago was they found all the salaries of Zuma and everybody on an estate agent's website? Remember that breach that was around? Anyone else remember it? Just me.
It rings a bell.
So all that data that was, somehow they found it. They then put it on this estate agent. I don't know where they got it. They got it from another one of these credit companies. And next minute it was open and everybody had it all over the place. It was all on the dark web and stuff like that. So it's a case of, why did we have this data? And the guy was saying, I don't know why we had it. Somebody may have done a request and they got the data and they put it on the website. And next minute everybody's got all the information. So we need to understand this situation. All right. So I always like to work at a principle level. So what are the principles that I need to follow with respect to this whole visibility, classification, and cataloging? So for me, the 4 areas are, and we spoke about it, it's transparency, and I can explain transparency by the provenance and the trust of the data. Accessibility, so have I got the right context to access the data, the quality and the format. Sufficiency is, do we have enough data to drive business? Discoverable means I can do a contextual search I can collaborate, and we can apply the techniques that we need to do on the data. So these are the areas that you need to work on, and you need to start with these things, each one at a time, and say, what does it mean to us, and what do we need to implement to get this right in terms of this classification? And it's helpful when we have these, then we can define from a governance and an architecture point of view, we can define the policies from the principles. So every single principle should have a policy and then have controls and procedures around it. All right. So this is the type of systems that are being made available across massive data sets with open data, where they have the ability to explore, find, and identify. They talk to a metadata broker, and this metadata broker can talk to the data portals. And we're getting lots of value out of this. The one customer that I've got is they said they're not that keen to share data at this point in time. So what they would like to do is have their own data portals, and only the data that they want to share goes into that data portal. And when a user or a consumer wants access to the data, they send a request, and each data portal by department or by group company responds to that request, responds to the metadata broker. And this is a technique that we're using to have this almost Google-like search, where we can search on any element like this breakdown of a business subject area model. We have this ability to say, okay, give me by term, by category, by whatever it is, I'm looking for this data by city, and this metadata broker will go and bring all the data sets back, not the data sets, they actually just bring the metadata back and they present it to the consumer. The consumer then just navigates through this metadata to find the information that it needs, and then it would go and apply for access to that information. Are there any questions on that? So one of the benefits that I'm seeing, and we've been looking at something like Snowflake. I don't know if you guys have seen some of the work that Snowflake is doing. Anybody looking and reading about Snowflake at the moment? It's a cloud-based data warehousing system. And it's built for enterprise data warehouses, but at the same time, it's built with a search engine and a sharing mechanism and managing the sharing without moving the data. Okay, so basically what they're able to provide is on any data set, they can, as the data administrator or the governance person, you can extract the metadata that data set is responsible for. You can then allow people to request access to the data. They can search on it, and it's almost it's like a perception that the user is working on a sandbox in their own area, but they are not affecting, and the data is not moving. So the data never gets copied from that enterprise data warehouse to any of the consumers. And you can do this both internally and externally. So you can list all of the third-party people that have access to your data. You can have all the sharing and the legal agreements with them, and they manage the access and the almost what they refer to as the temporal storage of that data. So you're not getting into this problem of sending a copy to another customer that may forget to put the protection on there and lose the data. The data is not moving outside of your organization within the cloud, which helps you tremendously in terms of keeping all of this data together and looking after the protection of the data. Any comments, questions on data visibility? That sort of brings an end to the data visibility question. No questions? All right.
Thanks, Howard. No, I think it's excellent. I just referring back to my last experience at the company I was at, and yeah, I think this is something again that was just completely missing in terms of, yes, people are working with data, they don't, but they don't know where it comes from. They don't know if it's too much, too little. The impact of dirty data. There's just so much, and I think this is a massive piece of work that could have been. Could be implemented, or even a project implemented to sort this out, so that we could, I mean, just solve so many problems. So no, just total awareness here in this discussion.
So if you think of, and I know you worked in the travel environment and you created data reports for 100, 200 customers, and you almost had a data team of people prepping the data, preparing it, producing the reports. Now, with this type of visibility and cataloging and things like that, you can now start to segment the data, but you never move the data, and you apply the appropriate filters by customer, by whatever it is, and you can present almost a logical data model for them on top of that. And they can pretty much report on their data without having to copy the data. They can certainly ask for requests to do the data download if they need to upload it into SAP, or they need to have some sort of data sharing agreement, but then that's managed in a different format. So
I mean, we were sitting in such a good position. Well, it was ripe for the picking to actually give, and I can't say every single report, but most reports as a self-service type report to customers, and that was the idea, but we never achieved it because there was just, I mean, the level of cleaning and fighting with the data to just get it right was incredible. So, and then obviously the data, the stewards or the citizens that were dealing with the reports and that, I've mentioned this before in another chat, but never knew where to go really to fix it. They just used to, because of time pressures and all that, obviously that's impacts as well, but just went and they just fix it themselves and then spend hours with the account managers fighting through and making the data look like it should look. And actually, that's also a funny statement. What should it look like? Make it like the joke about an accountant. What number would you like it to be? But but anyway, just a total awareness here. Thanks for that.
So we got to apply different techniques. I think the cloud is phenomenal in this, in terms of the tech that's coming along, and we can now certainly reduce some of the friction that we're getting involved with. And I think for us, it's all about reducing the friction of the appropriate access to the data, that accessibility, reducing the amount of data, the ability then to report on the data. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but one of my biggest nightmares with Papaya was the ability to say, this is, if a data subject approaches me, this is the data we have about you in these different areas. This is how we collected the data, and this is all we know about you. Now, how do we get that right? I don't know. You know, without a catalog, without a classification, without a system like this, how are we going to present that information to the data subject? Anybody got any ideas or comments on that? Okay. All right. So let's move on. This is the area that we were talking about. I wanted to just actually have a chat about, how do you guys see yourself, if you could answer on there, see yourself dealing with data protection. And so here's my biggest dilemma that I'm facing. If we look at South African people, let's take Liberty, for example. Remember, they had a challenge. They had international people investing So they had EU customers. They had people from California. They had people from Canada. They had people from South Africa. How do they manage all of these different regulations that they need to be compliant with? And then we've got Australian as well. So, and insurance companies and financial markets, people that are allowing investors to invest in South African products, this is going to be a nightmare for them, right? So how are we going to achieve all of this?
Well, for that one, I don't know. The easy way of doing it, which in my opinion would be just pick the most stringent one or the most strict one and apply it across the board. Or you can then probably get well, I know, like, for instance, SAS has something where you can apply different restrictions based on where the data was basically acquired. So it could be either or. I don't know. Usually people will probably go for the easiest option of just apply across the board the strictest one. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, that's happy. That's an approach. So someone has put their EU GDPR. So we would then, if we think about it, GDPR is really structured around the protection of EU data. That doesn't talk to us about local, and in a way they don't really care about external citizens. But what we could do is take that approach and apply it to ourselves. We do know that Papaya started with GDPR, but then has drifted along somewhat. So some of the alignments are not that simple and not applicable. So we have some challenges with just taking the GDPR, and we're actually working on that at the moment. I'll give you an example of some of the work we're doing. Whilst you guys are adding comments there for me. So what you can see here is a data protection ontology, and this is a higher level than GDPR, and it's dealing with all the core concepts, and they refer to it as a data protection in using the OWL language. And here you see on the left-hand side, we've got all the data subject rights, the different justifications of sharing data, the processing of data, and the actions that they took on data. And the nice thing about using something like OWL is that it has all of these relationships. So you can basically be sitting on any node and look at how it relates to all the other nodes. That's why it's got all these different lines going across it. It's a little bit more complicated than that of data modeling, but it's certainly something that you can use to bring about a level of structure or a graph database of all of the information that you need to keep about your subjects and the data assets that you have. So those are some of the techniques that we're putting together. Okay, so here we got some options. Strong CDO office. I think that's certainly where you have to start. Is making sure that people can convince the organization of the importance of this, of protecting the data, because that's not going to be a given. I think we battle sometimes just with getting data governance right. All right. So these are some of the things that I've put down in terms of how do we start. Okay, so I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but there's a fantastic amount of work that's been done by GARP. And it has what it refers to as generally accepted principles that you can use then to map to GDPR, you can map it to Papaya, you can map it to California, you can map it to those things. And it's done a very good job of looking at a set of principles that apply across all privacy. And so there's one that's called GARP, is we started with the accounting principles, and they then have developed generally accepted information management principles, generally accepted privacy principles, and then of course ISO does a whole lot of work. They've got global principles, global data privacy principles. I think the principle's name is 27701, ISO 27701, that they are trying to present a global privacy scenario. So that's the first thing that you got to look at. Bring the generally accepted principles as your core ontology, and then you can extend it by GDPR, by Papaya, where it doesn't fit into the accepted principles. So you're almost doing an inheritance or model extension to bring in things that haven't been dealt with specifically by the generally accepted principle. So object-oriented developers would use something like inheritance. Data modelers would use subtyping within that scenario and bring those other principles in, or they would extend where it hasn't been done. Now, the ontology and the taxonomies are perfect for this type of extension process, where you get your generic and then you extend for the appropriate regulation. But the important thing is getting everything to the generic principle. The next thing that I find very helpful is communication planning. Okay, so I'm sure you've seen some of the challenges that Experian have been facing, and if you compare that to the Liberty Life communication, Liberty Life did a fantastic job of understanding how to communicate. And what we've been working on lately is to say, if I'm going to stand up in court and defend my communication, all right, what is it that I need to tell them, and what information do I need to give to my chief information officer that when they do a press release, or when they release something on the web, or when they go to court, they have a communication plan in front of them and they have all the data. The amazing thing about that is that if we understand the communication plan of a privacy breach, an ethics breach, a regulatory breach, we know in that communication plan what data they need to present to the court, what they need to present to the regulator, what they need to present to the subjects. They have all of those data points that they need to report on. And this is a fantastic way of building the business requirements for the data that needs to be reported in this reporting leg down the bottom. Does everyone understand what I'm saying there? I'm not sure how to really impress on you that as data governance people, as data architects, as data modelers, we need to be part of the communication planning. How are we going to tell them? What are we going to say? So that if we are called in to go to court and to answer some of these questions as a reasonable man, that's what the courts use, then we answer it appropriately. We cannot go into court and say, I don't know the number of data assets we have. I don't know the number of customers that we let go in the breach. I am unaware of what we're keeping. We cannot do that. Is that making sense? Is any question on that in terms of?
That is really interesting, Howard. I think for me, I'm starting to see the link of how we really need to get close as data governance people to even marketing, because earlier on we were talking about a campaign that we would like to do, and just excuse me, my girls are in the back again.
Not a problem.
So we're talking about a campaign that we want to to communicate with all of our customers in a certain segment to sign up for a certain digital offering. And now, if there is regulation like how it popped about, regulation that says the customer has to have a right to opt out or opt in out of those campaigns.
Yes.
So I cannot excuse myself because I'm the custodian of that regulation. So if I'm not part of the communication planning, then that's a problem.
You're right. So if you look at these data subject rights, right of access, right to erase, right to information, meaning tell me all the information that you have. Give me transparency, right to no profiling, right to object, right to portability, right to rectification. These are the rights that the subjects have, and we need to be able to communicate that when we communicate with them, both when we set up the contract in the beginning and when we have a problem.
Definitely. I think thanks for highlighting that.
So this, I mean, and remember the first rule of data warehouse building, what are the questions that the business need to give? Now, this is defined, well defined by the communication plan. Very well defined. So
yeah,
a really good tool and instrument to use as data governance people. You front foot on this. You're teaching the execs how they're going to communicate before the problem happens. You've got the list of things. You can pull the data when it's needed, and you can present it to them. Of course, you've got to keep on checking that your numbers aren't wrong, but that's a different story. Yes, Duncan.
Just a quick question, Howard. In terms of that data protection ontology that you displayed, what tool is that built on?
Protege. This is imported into Protege, but you can use Top Raid, but Protege is free. So I'm happy to share with you guys the links and stuff like that.
Please, Howard, please do.
Okay, so this is all about semantic modeling. We've spoken about it earlier on. Here's the tool. Where's the tool? Where's the name? Oh. So this is the Protege documentation, Protege plugins, and how to cite Protege. So a really nice way of modeling your data and modeling your principles that you need to bring in. All right, the next one is this is also becoming very important. This privacy by design, ethics by design and engineering. What are they saying here is you need to prove to the court, to everybody, that you took cognizance of these things in the beginning, not at the end when you had a problem. You've built this into your SDLC. You've made sure the architects are aware of it. You've done all the assessments as you go. You've created the risk reports as you're progressing. So it's by design, guys. We didn't fluke this protection or privacy issue. We didn't fluke the report. This we had in our design all the way through. We need to be able to present that. Then we spoke about what Pumi was talking about is this lifecycle and risk management, data lifecycle and risk management. Critical, guys. And then we have the reports by regulation, by whatever it is, by communication plan. These reports are all available to the people that need them. If a regulator comes onto your site, they have the right to demand a certain amount of reporting evidence that you can show. And that's what you need to be able to do, and you need to be able to get that sorted out. Any questions, guys? I know we're going a bit late. Happy to keep going?
Sure.
Happy?
Okay.
Happy?
All right. Okay, so generally accepted principles, there's GARP, accepted accounting principles, and they learned this lesson because accounting were the people that suffered in the beginning. When they had global corporations, the rules in each country changed. So they had to get a set of, let's get it standard across the world, and then you can make the adjustments by legal requirement. IFRS, okay, IFRS is global, but let's say you had a specific accounting principle for the JSE or for SIPC, then you would do it according to that, but the principle stayed the same across everybody. GAAP is information management principles. GAPP is accepted privacy principles. I know there are more, but I just didn't have time to go through all of that. All right, so here's some examples of information management principles, a fantastic place to start, and you can create the principles for yourself, but this is something that you have. You get a principle, you then define the policies, the procedures, and controls, and you have to look at all of these areas. Anyone seen this before? Can I have a thumbs up for people that have seen it? Nobody? Oh dear. Ah, one. Okay. Two, great. Are you guys, anyone want to comment on it? Have you used it or have you just seen it? Has anyone used these principles as a starting point?
No, not on my side.
No,
Okay.
I've just seen.
All right. So yeah, a great place to, guys, you don't want to start this thing from the beginning, okay? I know the DMBOK has a set of principles, and I know that it also refers to the GAAP. So if you can, make use of the principles and then derive your principles that fit in line with this, and then you can always report back to that. So data management is going to be part of it. Here are the generally accepted privacy principles. Policies and communications, procedures and controls, policies and communications. Everything you do needs to have a communication, and then it talks to the procedures and controls that you bring in place. So this one is actually the one that's closer to PAPAIA than GDPR. So if you're going to start with something like Dennis suggested, start with GAPP. All right. Then we talk about the data lifecycle management. So here we've got where the data architects are part of the planning, the design and enabling, that's part of the data modeling. Then we've got creating as part of data integration, storing as part of data operations and storage, use is part of BI, enhance is part of AI, and disposal is part of privacy and auditing and things like that, archiving. These are the important elements that you get involved with. So, and what's important to notice about this data lifecycle is that different data types, for example, metadata, has a different lifecycle than data, the data, the transactional data, reference data, master data. They have different life cycles. So very helpful for you to go through something like this and understand by the type of data that we're doing, what is the data life cycle and how do we need to manage it? And there's another one in terms of personal data life cycle. So this is helpful when you do engineering on data privacy. You need to know that. Notice your data modeling, how they're getting involved in this. We're getting data quality as well in terms of the controllers. So all of these different areas are coming into play. And then this is a way of building it into your SDLC. So when you get the requirements, now guys, remember that even Agile, this is a waterfall thing, but if we added iterations, iterative development, Agile, they got to have the requirements, then the design and implementation. We got to be instituting as governance. We got to be introducing what are the processing requirements, refinement and representation. What is our threat model of this data that we're working on, and what is our strategy to enhance privacy, ethics, whatever it is, and then we get into the design. So these are the requirements that go into the design, and that's how we bring all of this stuff together. Any questions, guys? That's a sort of quick 1,000 miles an hour, very high level discussion on how we deal with visibility and protection. Does that does that help you guys in terms of understanding what the sort of effort we've got to go through from a governance, from an architecture point of view? How do we start bringing these controls in place? How do we start making it user-friendly and accessible?
Yes, I think it is definitely helpful, Howard, and thanks so much for putting so much time and effort into the presentation. So I really appreciate that. I think from my side, just also from being like relatively new, I'm kind of taking in bits and pieces at a time. Like I don't think I'm ready to take in everything all at once, but picking up like valuable points in between, like in terms of where I'm currently situated in my data career.
Okay. No, that's I think it's almost like going to university and then you realize, oh shucks, I don't fully understand that, but when I need it, I know where to go, and then I can drill down into the details and do a better job of bringing all this together. But it's that awareness. We're really just trying to get the awareness right for you guys to say, there's a better way of doing it. There's a structured way of doing the privacy, of getting the visibility. We just got to go and find it and make sure it works.
Thank you.
Yeah, well said. I would agree with that as well. Yeah, because it's quite a lot of information. Especially, I'm in the same boat, also new to this. Yeah.
Great. Okay, Paul, over to you.
Sure, Howard. Thank you. I'm feeling challenged. I need to summarize this. But thanks so much. It's going to be a long evening, but no, really good. I think it's thanks for everybody's contribution. I think it was just highly valuable once again, and I think it's for those that we do publish the recording. So please, if you want to just address this again and go through it, I'd probably advise you to do that. There's so much, but thanks again, Howard. Thanks everybody.
Bye everyone.
Bye-bye. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks. Cheers. Bye.